Anna, thank you so much for joining me on the channel. It's such a pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, Tevin, for having me.
Anna, your work it beautifully challenges the concept of brain-centrism, and it really invites us to think about cells' origins going outward. And what I want to know first is, what inspired you to shift the spotlight from neurons alone to this intricate body-wide web of cellular self-organization?
Thank you, Tevin. So I think this is coming from my background in philosophy. So when I started to, study philosophy, I looked around and I did what, everybody did, which was like, reading the philosophers and learning about things and everything else. But then one important thing stayed with me is the fact that there were so few female philosophers in the course as I was reading, and I was like, self-identify myself as a female. I said, well, why am I here actually? And just like, usually there are some guys, but not me. So that kind of like started to the first question, and then I realized that women weren't allowed to go to university until 100 years ago. And what does it mean? It means that even if I am now allowed to go to university and I'm among the lucky ones, then it still means that I have inherited a conceptual toolbox I have to operate with, and a way to look at the world as I operate with. And that usually starts with this, idea of, a genius solitary in an ivory tower thinking about, the immortality of the soul and how the universe is all about and where you're going from, blah, blah, blah. So that was like one way to put it. But me as, person, I didn't relate to the world and to philosophy this way. So for me, it was more like to understand how I become a philosopher, how I become thinker in a world which is highly, let's say, connected with, the messy reality rather than with the abstract, pure ivory tower. Because this was my reality. My reality was like messier, right? And than the one of the, let's say, the armchair. So even though I was like trained in analytic philosophy and I was like really, really diligent and was trying to understand what's going on, and I think I realized that there's like so much emphasis on cognition and language because there is so much, and minds because somehow related with the brain and the mind. But I think the really important question for me was like, if we connect intelligence and cognitive abilities with the brain only, how come a bunch of very dumb cells gave rise to something very smart? So if the biggest problem that we have at living system as humans is to stay alive as long as possible, why nature invent two systems, one dumb and one smart, to solve the biggest problem that we have, which is stay alive, right? So as soon as you, emerge into life as a, cell or embryo, you still need to solve that problem at that level, which is like how to avoid harm and make sure you process correctly the information that you get from the environment at that, cellular level. If you fail that, you don't get to have a brain, actually you don't get to exist. And then the question for me was like, why nature will invent two systems? One is dumb and one is smart. Because that's not a very smart thing to do. And I think nature is very smart. So because we are alive and we have all this beautiful abilities. And then I realized that actually we start with the wrong end of the stick, because we have this like adult-centric perspective and this embodied perspective on how the human mind works, and hence like the neurocentric and brain-centric perspective. And so that's my journey. It's like I gave you like really my my journey, how I got to, because I really took very seriously my role as philosopher to be a critical thinker. And I'm having this discussion with my colleague neuroscientists all the time because they're telling me, oh, you philosophers, you never find anything. It's like you can't report any findings. You don't have anything, concrete. It's like you're all up in the air and there's like hand waving and stuff. And I have this conversation with them all the time and tell them, well, that's kind of like, that's our job. Our job is like the annoying part, which is to ask questions, ask critical questions to make sure that we each time have a different angle, and that gives us a wider perspective, and find the spots that are a bit weak, and make advancement. And that's not, that's the opposite of the dogma, where it's just like, here it is, you take it or leave it, Whereas critical thinking, I think, is super important, and this is why philosophy should be at the core. So philosophy as critical thinking, not as ivory tower, let me tell you how the world works. But philosophical thinking as critical thinking should be at the core of all human inquiry.
Yeah. I completely agree. I think that's you have to almost be that instigator and that nitpicker, because it's the only way to make progress, is to actually challenge the status quo, take it further. You often describe the immune system as a foundational fact checker, in quotes, for survival, working hand in hand with neural systems. Could you unpack how this neuroimmune coupling forms the very rungs of life that give rise to thought, and how this reframes the classical mind-body problem?
Yes, thank you. This is an important and interesting question. So if you followed me in, my reasoning so far, saying that, well, having two systems, one dumb and one smart, is not a very smart thing to do if you're Mother Nature and you have a big problem to solve, which is like avoid death and stay alive, then from the very beginning you have... the problem that you need to solve is like, how can I keep track of myself and whatever is not the self? How do I actually know what matters for me? Why do I care and why I actually shouldn't care or just avoid? And one way to approach this is at the cellular level, because living systems, unlike non-living systems, are highly depending upon exchange and interaction with the environment, because you need stuff from the outside to function. You basically co-create yourself with the environment all the time. For instance, like at this moment I'm breathing, you're breathing, so we take in oxygen, and with the oxygen I'm taking, I'm breathing in, I take things that I really need for my survival, like oxygen, but I also maybe I take a virus, hopefully not, and then there'll be a big trouble for me. So I cannot shut down everything and say, okay, I'm going to stay still, not move, and live forever. This is not how it works in living system. Living system, you need, by definition, are vulnerable, independent, and this exchanges for better and for worse. Now, if that's the case, then, and if you're nature and you're smart, then you need a mechanism very early on that will allow you to keep track what is good for you and what is bad for you at the cellular level already. And I think in mammals like us, that system is the immune system. And the immune system is the system that keeps track what is good for you, for the self, and what is not good for you, for the self. So once you have that in place, this means that you already can negotiate the boundary between yourself and the environment in such a way that you actually filter what is getting in and what is getting out. I think also that will allow you to process information in inherently qualitative manner. So because living systems care about themselves, living systems don't want to die. This is what I mean. It's like living systems want to live. This is what they do. It's like the life is like the ontology of living system. It's not something that living system do on the top of what they are. They basically are the systems that avoid death and want to keep alive. And different systems have different strategies to keep alive. Some survive underwater, but they don't survive in air, and other they survive in air, but they don't survive underwater. So depending on the environment you have, and the trial and error that you did in billions years of evolution, then you let's say you manage to get a solution, like a system is like, okay, so this works more or less. And in the case of humans, that would be, I think, the systems that we have, which is the immune system that allows organisms very early on in the development to decide which information is good and should be processed, and which information is balanced, and most importantly, also which information should be ignored. It's like which information should leave out, because qualitative information processing means that if you're a successful system, you need to process information that really matters for you. Why? Because living systems have a beginning and an end. So this means that you don't have infinity at your disposal to say, well, I don't care, I can try everything, like some sort of formal mathematical model where I can, try all the infinite possibilities like in a chessboard. In life, you can't do that because simply you have a very limited, lifespan. So it can't really afford to process everything and try all possible solutions. You need to focus on the things that really matters, and for that you need to filter qualitatively the things that really matter and those you actually need to ignore. And if you get that wrong, then you waste energy and develop diseases and die very early on, and that's bad news for you. So I think the idea of the immune system working in tandem with other system or organisms allows me to show that actually very important and very smart things are in place at the level of organism before you even have a brain, to allow the organism to develop this highly sophisticated, beautiful system, which is our brain, that integrates all this and makes our world to appear, to feel so beautiful and so coherent and meaningful in most of the cases. But that doesn't mean that we should, overlook and ignore the humble work that has been done by our body before our mind kicks in with the, meta-awareness. Yeah. I think we have that awareness very early on, and it's kind of lingering in our life all the time. And more, I don't know, I feel like when people do meditation and they try to get rid of all the noise around and just focus on the pure, let's say, existence, so to speak, I think what is happening there, we most likely want to go back to that existence, almost like cellular existence, right? And we have that feeling of what does it mean to be like a cell, interconnected with the world in a very, a very simple way. I don't like the word stupid or dumb, obviously, but a simple way. But simple doesn't mean simplistic. It means you're just powerful and fundamental. Yeah, because without that functioning, you cannot have highly sophisticated cognitive behavior.
Yeah, I agree. I think even when you say the nervous system or the brain is such a sophisticated, intricate system, people often forget about how intricate and sophisticated the immune system actually is. Because even as a doctor, we learn such basic building blocks in med school that when you actually really think about it philosophically, scientifically, the immune system is one of the most intriguing, fascinating areas that you could study. It really is so complex that it's one of those things that probably will give us as much insight into understanding the nature of reality because of how complicated it is. Was there a reason that made you go down that route? Was there something specific about it?
Yes, and actually I came up across this this topic where when I was doing my work on embodiment, embodiment from a developmental perspective, because I asked myself, okay, so, well, we are not popping out from Zeus' head like Athena, like fully fledged individuals who kind of like develop inside other people's bodies. And I did some work on pregnancy, because I think pregnancy is, again, going back to my journey as a female philosopher, so pregnancy is kind of such a blind spot in philosophy in general. Because when you think of pregnancy, many people automatically associate pregnancy with certain category of people that have the ability to carry babies in their bodies. But if you think at pregnancy from the perspective of developing individuals, all of us have been inside another person's body. So the pregnant state is a universal state, concerns not some people, concerns all of us. So I was so surprised that this universality of the pregnant state was not taken into account by philosophy in general, because not only it's like traditionally the body was disregarded, but, the other's body was disregarded too. And biology, if you believe in biology, and I do believe in biology, it's like if you look at how actually things are, we can measure and see them, then you say, oh, wait a minute, just like this is how it's happening and why and how. And then the interesting question would be, ask myself, okay, so suppose you are a cell and, an embryo you want to develop, and suppose you have your own immune system, and you face bad things happen to you and good things happen to you, and you need to make decision and make good decision and bad decision. But then you are inside another living system, and the living system, the other living system, is not an object, is not some neutral like a room or a vase or a basket. So you don't just drop an egg and the egg just develops. It's just like it's a constant negotiation, and very careful negotiation between the two organisms about the resources and the space they're going to share for, let's say, 9 months, right? So, and obviously the two systems have different immune system. So how the two immune system communicate to make sure that, I'm not going to, reject you, or you reject me, or, something bad is happening. So I did some work on that side, because I think this is a key question, and a fascinating one. If we understand how we negotiate the self-other representation boundary relationship at that level through the communication of the two immune systems, then we might unveil something really important, fundamental about how we function once that problem is solved in the rest of the world. Because that communication very early on, those exchanges, they give us like a tool. They prepare us like a tool to exchange with the environment in a way that is really, really highly adaptive. And this is an ongoing work. It's like, as I said, it's like this idea that, well, the mind is somehow related. When I started my career, embodiment was such a fringe thing to do. It's like, oh, this is like, new age, flower power. Yeah. Now it's getting more people, getting more and more, used to the idea. Yeah, I think that's okay. We have a body and somehow it's related to the mind, and that it's important. So we kind of like get there. And the next step would say, well, actually the body is related to other bodies, and from there to the world. And so it's slowly getting there. But what I think what is happening at the level of the pregnancy is still very much like a gray area. So it's an open question and many things that need to be answered. And one of them is the fact that there is an organ that has been overlooked, in philosophy, and that's the placenta. So the placenta is a universal organ and is a relational organ par excellence. So that's something that mediates, like stands in between. And it's an open question, but some people argue, and I tend to agree with them, that what is happening with placenta, that they form a third immune system. So almost like a mediator, like a negotiator. Okay, so let's say, what do you have? What do you have? Let's see whether we can arrange this. I mean, you and I, we are the product of a successful negotiation because we are still here, we are alive. But, in some cases, actually, baby can die, the mother can die, or both can die. So, sadly, as we know. So it's not pre-given. That's a negotiation, that's an ongoing process. And I like this idea of negotiation because I think this is precisely what it is. There are two systems that try to come to an agreement, to bring new forms of life. And for that, they need to share resources and space. And I think this notion of like sharedness is super important because I think that's also something that we tend to take for granted and we let it aside, especially we take like the high-level approach and the individualistic approach, right? Once we have been provided with everything, we tend to consider ourselves like autonomous and individuals. But actually, if we function so well right now, is because we mastered very early on with our caregivers the sharedness of experiences that gave us, the tools to allow us to flexibly engage with the environment very early on. So we have the illusion that we can do it on ourselves, and it can be on ourselves without other people, but that's just an illusion. The fundamental state that we have is that of the shared information. And the way you are able to share information, to exchange information, that will define your chances for survival. Not how good, how smart, how fast you are in your room. So I think that's kind of like a flip on the perspective I would like to propose. It's not for the faster. It's about if you are more successful, if you are more willing to negotiate and take advantage of that negotiation between the systems. And I think that's an important. I think that's an important shift that we should bear in mind, especially when we want to create artificial version of ourselves.
Yes.
Because we tend to hoard information, with AI systems, and nature didn't create us as hoarder.
Yeah.
It created.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to start off this way, was because even while reading about it, when I read that paper, I thought about the fact that this is the first time I'm reading about pregnancy or developmental from the womb from a philosopher's perspective, which is fascinating. And what you're touching on is exactly why. As being a woman in philosophy doing this, it gives us such an important insight that's been neglected for thousands of years. And for anyone who hasn't read that paper, I will put a link to it. You also wrote an essay, I think it was an aeon, that was called From Cells to Selves, I think it was called.
Yes.
Yeah. So if someone wants an easier read, I'll also put a link to that as well. But one of the striking things that you do say in both of those pieces of work is that we perceive through every single cell of our body, especially in these early developmental stages in the womb. What profound insights, I mean, you just mentioned some briefly, but what profound insights does this nested cellular perspective give us into the very origins of consciousness itself?
Thank you, Tevin. That's an important and huge question. So I'll try to make it.
Take your time. Take your time. Feel free. The podcast. This is about you, right now.
Yeah.
I just want to.
So consciousness typically is defined as as the ability to have phenomenal quality of our experiences. So Thomas Nagel, as I said, very famously argued that, there is something what it is like for me to be in a certain state or for a bat to be in a certain state. So there is like a phenomenal aspect of our experiences, which is qualitative and subjective. So that's one way to understand consciousness. And many people talk about qualia regarded to phenomenal consciousness. Again, as I said, it's like I hear what people say, But again, with my critical insight that I inherited from my grandmother, I have to say, I was just like not the type to just like take whatever the world throw at her. She was like, actually, I think she was Wittgensteinian without realizing, because her favorite thing was like, wait a minute, let me think, and that's what Wittgenstein would say. It's like, let me think, I'm not sure. Let me think. So I did some thinking on this, and I think I disagree with the very concepts of consciousness and qualia. And I know it's radical, but I don't think there is a thing called consciousness, and I don't think there's a thing called qualia. I think these are object or reified concepts like that we use because it's easy. So we talk about consciousness and as one word, and talk about qualia as one word, which makes us it's very easy to just like reify them as, I don't know, this nail polish, yeah? So this means that you can, and if you tacitly consider as an object, then you say, well, I can move it from point A to point B. So let's suppose like one of those series, like upload, right? So I take my consciousness from my head and put it in some virtual body, and then I'm going to live forever, yeah, in the virtual world, right? So if you conceive consciousness this way, like a thing, then you have tons of problems, I consider. So I want to say radically, actually, there is why consciousness is not a thing. I think consciousness is something living system do. So it's a verb. it's a process. And I would like to change the phrasing from consciousness to talk about conscious experiences. And I want to put the focus on the experience, because experience is something like a very interesting word, because it in itself it includes the time, it includes the sensory, it includes like the individual. So how experiences do not float in the air, experiences are given to a certain individual here and now. And I can also make a distinction between two notions of experience. And you will see, I hope that this distinction will answer your question, right? So what is the complexity? So I want to say that we have what I call the experience in N, which is the Hegelian Y, the phenomenal quality, which I think it's an important part of the experience, but it's a bit sophisticated. So I think we do have experiences, what I call experience in G, like grounded. Or I have a paper with Eric Beckers on this, which is related to artificial consciousness, but, we make the point on this as well, like human experience, human conscious experience. And experience a G coming from grounding, but actually when I proposed the term was coming from my grandmother, a G like my grandmother, because she was telling something like, I have experience in opening wine bottles because I did open a lot of wine bottles before. So experiences in this sense means like on the ontological process of going through events and states in spatial time problematization to actually do stuff. In this sense, fetuses, my experience after a certain time, or babies can experience, cats experience, living system experience the world in the sense like they go through a certain type of like, events at the sensory level to solve the problem how to stay alive and how not to die. And they do that before they actually have a highly sophisticated cognitive system tell them like, let me think, shall I go right or shall I go left? Yeah. So we don't have time as living system to do this type of sophisticated thinking. And there are a lot of studies that show that, for instance, like tennis players, if you are in the flow, it's just like you perform very well, but as soon as you ask them to think of their movements, they got impaired, because cognitive high-level thinking is efficient, but requires a certain condition, which is like energy consuming, and you need to have like a very limited square where you can actually focus on that. If you are in the move, and life is about movement, nothing is really static. Things are always changing. Nothing really goes according to the plan, So then this means that you need to somehow navigate this through experiences in a very dynamic way. And I would say that for me, those experiences are fundamentally embodied. And I would say what is really, really important is embodied experiences, in the sense I define like G, like grounded. And on the top of that, you can have phenomenal experiences, and that's something that appears at the surface of existence. So we use a metaphor in our paper with Eric, where we use the metaphor of the ocean. So you can think of experiences G as the ocean and experiences N as the waves. So the idea is like you cannot have the waves without the ocean, but you can have an ocean without the waves. So in order to have phenomenal experiences, it's not enough to have like the qualia abstracted from whatever the body does or the experiences does in the past. On the contrary, that is whatever experience means, yeah. And then it's an open question I haven't thought about yet exactly what I want to call that. The entire spectrum I want to call it conscious experience. Whereas like, and you have like implicit awareness versus explicit awareness. Let's say, suppose you are sleeping, and when you sleep, obviously you have your eyes closed, but you still need to breathe. So there is self-related sensory processing when you sleep, because it has to be. And actually you hear for, auditory signals are still processed during sleep, because if you hear like a tiger coming, you need to, wake up and run. From an evolutionary perspective for the survivor, it's very important to still keep like an eye, a figurative eye on what's going on coming from outside. Why? Because, as I said, we live in a shared world. We don't live in a bubble. So it's like, whether we like it or not, this kind of exchanges are there all the time. So how do you solve that problem? So if you consider that conscious experience as necessarily related just with the awareness of what I have when I have like what it is like, those of my experiences, then you have a big problem of how you explain, the passage, switch on, switch off button, right? When exactly you actually, conscious, well, how many neurons you have? I mean, you need to have for the awareness to kick in. And where exactly those neurons need to stop is the neurons that you have in the stomach. Why? Because you have neurons in the belly before you have the neurons in the brain. And, where exactly, the mind is, where it stops at the neck, why at the neck, where exactly in the skull. So I think we have big problems if we think of this distinction very, because you're talking about the mind-body problem, but I think that's a huge problem that we have. Whereas, if you are asleep, and in my proposal, you're still experiencing in the sense you're still hearing the noise of the city, you still smell, the fresh air, or you smell the smoke. And those information are processed by your brain. And if your brain is correct in making the decision, this is smoke, I don't like this, let's kick in, this extra mechanism to bring in the meta-awareness, explicit thing, and then you wake up and realize there is smoke and you want to survive, so you try to escape. Then that might explain why you are still experiencing during the sleep, and you build on that. So there is a track record, a fact checker that works for you all the time. And that's your body. This is what your body does, right? Through the lungs, through all the other metabolism, not necessarily just the conscious awareness, the phenomenal thing that we have on the top of that. The fact that we do have that, I think that's fascinating, and it adds as I said, the sophistication of what it is likeness, and that's something we are philosophers are obsessed with. But for me, what is really interesting is how we keep experiencing all the time. And I think the really interesting question is like how we get from those experiences, G, to the experiences, F. For me, it's on a continuum. So there is no pineal gland problem because there is one single big system. And that's an embodied self-organizing system, which has a big problem, which is I don't want to die. And everything is, every type of information that you process is through that lens. And you process that, this is what I said, with every single cell. You process that with your skin when you sleep. Because if you feel the heat on your skin, that's, connected with a subtle signal in the brain that says, well, I don't like that, wake up and run. And if you fail to wake up, then, it's like that's the end of it. And then that's bad news, yeah. So this is why I want to say, it's like, I think we need, and it's like provocatively saying that Eon piece, do you need your toes to think? And the answer is yes. And many people say, what do you mean? It's like, I can cut my toes and still think. But the problem is how you actually got to think, how you actually got there. As I said, it's like we're not teleported on the top of the mountain. And I have another metaphor for this, because for years I was using the metaphor of a tree because of the developmental aspect. I was trying to make the case that we might be very tempted from the adult-centric, neurocentric, and very brain-centric perspective to when I look outside my window, I see a tree and I'm fascinated by the branches and the trunk and everything, and I want to understand how the tree works, and I just like focus on that connection, how exactly that branches connect with the other one, and I'm measuring everything. But if I don't look down in the roots and I disregard the roots of the tree, I actually don't understand how the system works as a whole, and how you develop from a seed to actually a tree. And this is what I was trying to put forward. It's like in humans is the same. It's fascinating to look at how the adult brain works. But if you don't understand how the brain works in adults, developing from, the cellular through, developmental side, then you might miss something like important about big picture on, what a tree is, what a human is, what the human mind is. So that was one of my favorite metaphors, also because I like trees. But now I have another one, which is connect with the mountain. I like mountains too. And I think what I'm trying to push against is this idea that suppose you want to climb a mountain, and obviously you start with the first step, and you start with the first step, and then you climb, and you arrive on the top. Let's say you have the plateau, and everything looks so beautiful from up there. You look like top down, and literally look down on other systems, right? But if you want to define what climbing of the mountain means as a process, you can't really understand how you got there without the first step. And you can't say that the first step is minimal, because whatever was minimal at that stage was maximal at that stage, because this is precisely what you needed to do at that particular stage. So maybe if you do exactly the same at different level, that will not work. So hence you need to take the system again as a whole. And what counts, what we might see when we look down from our sophisticated adult-centric perspective, we literally look down on those like humble systems that do the work for us before we are able to actually look back and understand how they work. It's like to treat them as simple and dismiss them. But I don't think that's the right approach. I think every single step counts in the climbing of the mountain. And the way you connect step 1, step 2, step 3, until you actually get on the top, that for me, this is what experience means in a grounding sense. So this means that the climbing of the mountain is what these experiences, and then we arrive on the top of the mountain and we have like that sophisticated way of like, looking back in the past, looking in the future, looking inside, and having this introspective qualities that we have as adults. But that really builds on the humble, small steps.
Yeah, no, I love these analogies. I think it's important to sort of to think that way because it paints a clearer picture for people. For example, the one with the tree, you spoke about the roots, but people often also neglect the things like the fungi that help them to communicate. There's all these smaller things beyond that, as you said, paint such a bigger picture for us. Similar to us when we think about the microbiome and how much bacteria actually run a human body. We don't really consider that as being human, but to be fair, we've got so many more bacterial cells in our system that technically we're more bacteria than we are human. So and that's one of my favorite things about Tolkien is these books behind me, but is the Ents when they communicate, the trees, is that they communicate much, much slower than the hobbits, let's say. And that's the same thing about realities. Trees actually do communicate. It's just that the pace, the speed, and the way in which they do it, it's a different type of cognition that's occurring, or intelligence, let's say. But you point out that cognition existed long before neurons, and even in bacteria and other neural forms. When you think about something like that, and because I want to paint a deeper picture of experience, but first understanding that what you're doing is not trying to anthropomorphize trees, rather you're trying to naturalize cognition. And that's an important point for people to understand. So do you want to perhaps build on that?
Yeah, so I actually think that in order to understand how the human mind works, instead of focusing on what sets us apart from other living systems, we need to understand what we share in common, what we have in common. What I think we will understand paradoxically way more about ourselves. We understand what we have in common with our living system rather than what sets us apart. Like, I don't know, mathematics, logic, arts, and whatever, this type of things. I think that on the contrary, there is something very fundamental in the sense like the first step to the climbing of the mountain. And I think obviously all depends on how you define intelligence, or cognition, but from the perspective of life, and humans are clearly living systems, then if you define intelligence from the perspective of living system overall, then the smart thing to do for a living system is to stay alive as long as possible and to survive as a species as long as possible. So that's what the successful problem solving is for intelligent system in living system. Yeah. So this means that from that perspective, there are certain creatures in this world that have been in this world before us, who will most likely be here after we get extinct. So from the life perspective, those are very highly intelligent systems. I mean, life doesn't care if you know how to solve differential equations. If you just die tomorrow, that's not very smart. Yeah. So life perspective really is about keep going, and that's keep it to the flow, right? This works only if you consider there is only this dimension. I mean, I know that some people consider there are different dimensions, so they have like the natural or supernatural, or we have the natural dimension, and you have formal dimension, like abstract spaces, like Platonic spaces. I personally, this is my choice. I stick to it. I'm not saying it's the correct one or the only one. I'm saying this is what I endorse. Is that I think there's only this thing which is called it's happening now. And I don't have like a dimension or a second shot, unfortunately. So I need to be careful what I'm doing here and now, right? So from that perspective, life perspective, then intelligence, if you define intelligence this way, this means that you shift the perspective, and this means that we do share with the system. This is why it's important, the clarification that you said about anthropomorphization. It's actually the opposite of anthropomorphization. I want to focus that we do share with the system a big problem. We share the big problem, which is we don't want to die. So and stay alive, and that's something fundamental. And then different systems, depending on the environment, depending on many, many factors, they solve the same problem in very different way, right? So like, as I said, the fungi solve the problem by communicating through different channels. The trees, they do it through a different time, pace. Whales, they're doing differently. I don't know, bacteria, they're doing differently. They communicate, and they actually, some parasites, they try to, use other people, other living system resources to, solve again the same problem. So I think if we bring back the mind-body distinction, mind-body problem, and linking to the big problem that we have as living system, which is this is our own dimension and stay in it, stay here. Yeah, it's like this is cool. It's like we shouldn't try anything else. Then we have other problems, but not the classical mind-body problems, because I think the classical mind-body problems comes from what I take to be the Soma-Sema theory that we have inherited from the Greeks and, our tradition. Soma-Sema theory means, Soma means body, like somatic therapy, blah, 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 and Sema means tomb. So the idea was that the body was a tomb for the soul and the spirit, or the mind, or the psyche. And personally, and again, this is my personal opinion, is that I think that we have invented this distinction as a coping mechanism to resist the idea that we're going to disappear. So it's like, again, it's the same big problem. We don't want to die. And how to solve that problem? It's like, well, maybe, it's like, maybe I'm not really, really dying. Maybe this is like, there is something of me that can be, passed on a different level. And, I don't know, embodied in a different, things. And because the body is this thing that you see it growing and decaying, and the body is the thing through which you suffer, you get ill, and you get all this like problems. And, you see, dead bodies, and you say, okay, so that's, it's a real problem. It's a thing. Yeah. And I think we humans, we know that we're going to die. So when we start to become adults and we understand what we have this metacognitive awareness, and we developed coping mechanism to this massive, huge problem. As I think I look at my cat, she's super happy, and one day she will die, but she doesn't really have existential anxiety and issues about this. She's just like enjoying life, whatever she does now, and then one day, poof, disappear, and that's it. Yeah. And most likely infants and children are like that as well. So and I think the wisdom that, we try to get when we do all this like meditation and retreats is like to make peace with this idea, say, well, stay in the present, stay in the present, stay in the present, because it's the only thing that actually exists. Yeah. So my cat in that sense is highly philosophical being, because she always stays in the present. She doesn't meditate, but she's like, she knows that she's like, I don't want to know, which is like, I was like, yeah, it's like, I know there is something there, but I'm not going to stop and think about it. Just like enjoy my moment, enjoy the here and now, like a cat. So that we have inherited that from the tradition, and then we have the Cartesian distinction, then all the problems are exactly, they connect with each other, blah, blah, blah. But I think in the end, that distinction that we have it only signals for me something beautiful about humans, which is our vulnerability and the fact, and our temporality, and our fact that we are finite beings and we have an end, and that makes us vulnerable. And I think in a way that's something beautiful, something that we can share, because I think that's a necessary condition for life. And I'm very careful when I'm saying this, because when people, I ask my students, I'm playing this game with them, and I'm telling them, okay, so let's play a game. I'm going to say a word, they say the opposite quite quickly. So let's say good, bad, and I'm telling them death, and they immediately say life, and I'm saying no, it's wrong. And they say, what do you mean it's wrong? I said the opposite of death is birth. It's like birth and death are the two, catastrophic points that, and life is in between. Technically speaking, eternal life doesn't mean anything. It's like, it cannot be eternal life because there has been a beginning that you take for granted. And it's like, the point is like, you don't want to have an end, but that's something very different, It's like you did have a beginning. And then the question is, where were you before being born, right? It's like, it's clear that you want to go somewhere when you die because you don't want to disappear. But then I think the really interesting question, if you put life in between birth and death, then you have two problems, another problem, right? It's like not just like after life, but before life too, right? And that's one single big problem. And I think life necessarily implies that there is a beginning and there is an end, and there is a beauty in this, let's say, this constraint that is like makes things very intense for us. And hence,
I think it even goes further, because if we had to nitpick that further and take it even further, then one could still say that, when does the birth really occur, or when does the death really occur? Because the fact is, prior to birth, every cell's doing many things within your mom or whatever, or the sperm cell, whatever. But then if you take it further to death, you're decaying, you're becoming compost, you're doing something, you're becoming part of another species, perhaps, in terms of whatever eats you. So it's kind of this continuous process as well. And so when does that occur, and where do we draw this line?
Yeah. I think to answer that question, we need to go back to the notion of self and self-organization, and how a certain bunch of, living materials like cells decide to, communicate together to create a certain system with a plan, as Mike Levin said. That's right. Like living system are a system that have a plan, which was not, given from the sky, but it was like carefully developed and changed across, many errors and trials. It's like they say, well, the eyes should be here, the nose should be here. That's a plan, and if you have the things that where it's like, maybe you're not going to survive because that's not the plan. So if you change the ontology and you leave aside the classic ontology of bricks of layers of reality and how they kind of like go on the top of each other, and you consider as being fundamental not the individual bits, but how the very type of exchanges, remember that what I said about the sharedness, the very type of exchange that you have between bits, that allows that sharedness to be successful and fruitful between the system and whatever nourishes the system, and you consider that as being fundamental, then you have a very different ontology. And that will explain, your question is like, well, that will disappear when you die. You don't have that anymore. So your different types, there's going to be a massive communication breach between, those systems, and you're going to just, transform into something else, but you're not going to, keep this up. And I think that's super important. I think this inside, I know it sounds a bit, subtle, but I think it's super important, and especially for when we think about creating artificial systems. Because if the ontology of artificial system implies a very different type of communication or a very different type of relationship in between the system, then it will give you a different system, not a conscious system that we have. So we project our own understanding into whatever the system do, which I think it's fair. This is what humans do, anthropomorphize automatically, because it's safer for us. to look for communication. So it's very safe and very important to keep the communication open. So because nature told you very early on, you can't really survive alone. So you need to communicate with others. You need to be open to communication. So whatever you create, and we can project ways of replying back to be able to communicate with them. For us, that's safe nest. It's like it's familiar. This is what we do with the world, right? It's a communication. But this means that we need to be careful about the ontology that we're using.
Yeah. The reason why I brought that up was because I think it was almost a great segue to get you into talking about that self and just because you've done a lot of work on depersonalization disorder as well, especially through the lens of active inference with people like Carl Friston, Anil Seth, etc. How does that type of work and that model explain the dramatic shifts in the sets of self and agency that people report, for example? I mean, and why is this such a powerful tool for exploring something like the mind-body interface?
Thank you, Tevin. So that's an important question. So in my head, everything is related, but so I'll try to communicate my head with the world. So I did my thesis on physicalism in qualia. So that's what actually the title of my thesis. And as you know, as we discussed, one of the big open questions in philosophy of mind was like this phenomenal aspect of conscious experiences. And one of the most famous arguments is the zombie argument by David Chalmers, where it said, well, we can imagine that, we have a system, but without, the phenomenal qualities. And it's like without the, what is this likeness of experience. But then I did a postdoc in London at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience, and I did a project there with a couple of colleagues at ICN, and I worked on people that feel disconnected from the body and disconnected from themselves. And interestingly enough, these people report their experiences as being machines, automata, robots, zombies. So basically, when they are disconnected from the self and the body, they feel as if they go through life as objects in an automatic manner. So they function, but they're not really present in the way my cat is, So my cat would be like the opposite exactly for that, because, because my cat doesn't have the ability to detach from whatever experience she has, she doesn't have the choice but to be fully present in experience, and hence she has this presence. And that is that's highly disrupted in depersonalization people. So these are people that, for various reasons, either they've been through trauma, or they through radical changes in their lives, like moving to a new country or speaking a new language, or they went through radical perceptual experience such as recreational drug use, or they had accidents like car accidents, or, as I said, massive trauma, like rape. So when you are confronted with something which is really overwhelming, then I think there is a coping mechanism put in place where you kind of disconnect, detach yourself, the awareness, and you say, oh, this is too awful, but that's okay because it's not happening to me. It's happening to that other person. It actually happens to be me, but that's just contingent. There's not really a connection there. So this is how they describe themselves. I'm seeing myself doing things, but I'm not really there. I'm not doing them, right? So it's a way to keep people safe, right? It's like it's a way to raise above, so to speak, the messy, overwhelming environment that they can't really control anymore. So if that happens, so you have that state. I mean, I don't know about you, but these feelings of detachment are highly common. I mean, it happened to me when I'm massively jet lagged and I travel to a country and I have to give a talk. I can see myself doing the talk. It's like somebody else is speaking, but I know what she's doing, but I'm not really there. It was like, just like do it on automatic pilot, right? But luckily with the rest, I come back and, the merge happens. But imagine that you are stuck in that position and you can't really go back. What do? You want to get back control over that, because the problem is once you disconnect from the bad, whether you like it or not, you also disconnect from the good, from, the pleasure of life, like love, like affection, like anything. So you actually can't cherry pick, say, well, actually, I'm going to disconnect just from the bad things, but I'm going to keep the good things. You disconnect from everything. And, after a while, you kind of like crave that feeling of connectedness that you don't have anymore. And they describe, they dramatically, that there is like a veil between them and reality. They like a fog. Sometimes they describe they being a bubble, so there is no more clarity of the engagement of with the environment. So I would say, for me, the connection with the self and the body is by the simple fact that has such a dramatic consequences when these are massively disconnected. It actually points to how important it is in normal life, in typical life, because when we take for granted. And one of the metaphors that is typically used in literature is that of the transparent window. So suppose you have a transparent window and it's so transparent you don't see there is a window there. You have the feeling that is actually the world outside. But then there is a crack in the window. If there is a crack in the window, then two things become apparent. One is that there was something there when you thought there was nothing there. And the second is that you can't really see outside anymore, because the connection with reality is kind of like blurred. So you needed that kind of like transparency of the self experiences that allow you almost like a transparent bridge to, keep the flow, the exchanges between you and the environment. And then the idea would be, well, when you feel disconnected from yourself, you crave connection with others, or with the world, but because the world was such an overwhelming place, you tend to go back to the self. And that paradoxically is like a vicious circle, and that we can't really, get in touch with the self because you don't have connection with the world. So, and hence you're functioning on the automatic pilot. This is very dramatic, and people suffer in silence from this. And it's I would like to raise awareness on this, because if you see these people from the outside, so to speak, because they are functional, you don't feel that there is something really distressing happening to them, but actually it is very, very distressing, and people get really unhappy, and sometimes they say paradoxical things, something like, I don't feel any emotion, it makes me so unhappy. So this idea of openness and vulnerability, I think that's kind of like gone. And because it's gone, I think the very, let's say, vulnerability, humanity is gone as well. And hence the feeling of automaton in machines, yeah? And for me, that was like an interesting case of real life case, because I said, okay, thought experiments are cool, and it's very powerful philosophical tools. But, we also have in reality people that actually have these experiences, and they feel this way and they describe themselves this way. And then we can actually look at this experience in a careful way to see whether we can find ways to, help them. Like in hands-on fashion, and that's one branch of my work. So I'm doing a couple of projects and experimental work on exactly this, like connection between self and body and depersonalization. And actually, I have another a project where I look at effect of interacting with humans versus artificial mind and body on the human body and cells, sense of self. And my human participants are divided into two groups. So groups like typical controls and a group that feel disconnected from the body. So I want to see, do people that actually feel disconnected from the body feel more comfortable when doing tasks with artificial others, right? So it's almost like, if you feel like a machine, do you actually like to work with a machine more than you actually like to with a human? And what is the consequences of that, right, in society? Because this is actually going to interact more and more with machines. So we need to know what is the effect on us and our bodies. And I'm doing this in 3 different types of artificial embodiments, and humanoid robots, virtual reality, and chatbots like AI. And I'm doing this in 3 different cultures because, people, we were talking about cultures earlier, so like people interact with robots very differently in Lisbon than in London than in Hong Kong and Tokyo. So it's important to have cross-cultural connection there.
Yeah, I think that the diversity matters in that regard. But to go back to what you were talking about earlier, Anna, it's because even when I did my work, I used to work in psychiatry, and I used to work as a psychiatry medical officer, and that was when I actually wrote my dissertation. And I focused so much when I wrote about consciousness. I remember thinking that anyone who talks about consciousness was not considering atypical mind, let's say, is making such an uninformed decision, and that philosophers of minds should uniquely focus on psychiatric disorder and vice versa. Psychiatrists should also, their philosophy should be uniquely philosophy of mind, trying to understand this mind-body connection. So it's a very mutually symbiotic relationship that has to be nurtured. And it's not to say that we use them as test subjects, but it is to say that that's one of the best sources of information. That it's often neglected, I think, in philosophy of mind.
Yes, this is true. So I remember a long time ago when I joined Twitter, X now, I found an exchange there where it was like somebody tweeted, because computational psychiatry became very trendy at that time. So they say, good luck to psychiatrists, they will have to learn statistics and mathematics. And somebody tweeted, a reply said, well, good luck to mathematicians because they'll have to go to hospitals and speak to the patients.
Yeah,
because
I love that.
we do need some data from somewhere, it's like, and how you get that data from? It's just like, well, you get out the armchair, you go to the hospital, and start talking with people to get like the phenomenal experience, the raw material out of it, and then you can put a number on it, which is fine. But, it's like, again, that divide is like, oh, give me the numbers and I'll solve the problem. I don't think it works, right? And other way around, I don't think it's either, because you cannot, it's important to have the experience, but also you need to, quantify it in a way and to make it more rigorous. So hence interdisciplinary efforts are important. And as you said, it's like, philosophers should work with neuroscientists, with computational people, with psychiatrists, and people with lived experiences. Because in my experience, and I actually work a lot with people with lived experience from charities and things, there is nobody can tell better than themselves how they actually feel. I mean, think of you. Suppose you feel something, hopefully not, but let's say you have a problem in the elbow or something, and you feel it now, and it's kind of like bothering you, and you go to the doctor. The first thing you'd say is like you describe your experience of like the elbow, and then the doctor takes it from there and puts in all sorts of machines to see what's wrong with your elbow. But the first entrance point of problem solving is you communicating the experiences of my elbow hurts, and then you can say, well, actually it's more on that side and everything else. So, and that cannot be disregarded, no matter how technical and geeky we get in with computational modeling. And it's like because you feel it right away as soon as you get sick. And you need to go to the doctor and you need to explain how you feel. Then you get this like, I cannot come there, which is like, here is my model. I think this is what's wrong with me. It's like you need to access the world of others through the sharedness of communication, the expression that you have of your experiences. And that comes necessarily from your subjective perspective. which can be wrong. Let's say you feel here, but let's say you have some neurological condition, and actually your pain problem is somewhere else in your body. So there is nothing wrong with your hand, but let's say you have a tumor. Hopefully not. But it's like I'm touching wood here. I'm talking for myself too. So that was my example wants to say. It's just like we cannot get rid of experiences, and especially because we take it for granted, and we realize how important they are when things go wrong.
Yes, definitely. And I think even when I interact with patients and you understand that phenomenological lived experience, their expression of what's going on, versus just merely x-raying the arm, for example. I mean, there's so much more to it. Their recovery process, what's going to happen in their life, what's going to happen, can they write in the future? There's so many different things to think about. And there's even a field in psychiatry, it's called phenomenological psychopathology, that focuses on that. Carl Jaspers and a lot of others, Merleau-Ponty, etc. But even in your work, when you explore things like the self-other boundaries that emerge through touch, for example, or embodied interaction, and these types of things show us how the social cognition, it could point towards this more collective and extended forms of a consciousness, because when we communicate to each other right now, even we're basically extending this, we're growing together, basically. There's this nurturing of an embodied cognition occurring together. What are your thoughts on that? I think you've done some work on that as well. I can't remember one of the co-collaborators, but yeah.
Yeah, so again, going back to this idea that if you start with the adult-centric perspective, consciousness science is extremely biased towards vision perception, and there's like tons of work on, visual awareness of a dot on the screen and how I can report that. But if you go back to the roots, the humble roots, then you realize that you relate to the world and you need to sample the world and you need to understand the world through experience, as my grandmother say, way before you're actually able to, look at yourself in the mirror and understand that whatever is a mirror, that's yourself. You need to solve the big problem of life way before you can, shift back from the third person perspective from yourself, or to have visual awareness. So this means that we do have senses that I would like to call the bridging senses. And I have a paper coming on that. This is how I call them, the bridging senses. And I want to say something radical about it. I want to say that we have senses that are bridging, in the sense like they are there all the time. Touch, like the sense of inside the body, and also the smell, the olfaction. So these are senses that are supposed to bridge you with the world. And I want to push against the idea that the self is necessarily related just with interoceptive processing. It's almost like localization chauvinism. I think that's something I just invented now. It's like, it's not because it's just inside, locally situated, that is most important. Without the constant exchange that you have through the skin or, respiration and the smell, you're not going to get very full. It's a bit like, with the heart. So I think it's a combination of those. So you need those changes fundamentally. So touch is not... tactile experience and olfaction are not just like, let's say, like the poor relatives of the selfhood. These are, on the contrary, these are the things that actually do the heavy lifting in our, and we just like take them for granted because they are there all the time. And hence this idea that, perhaps the senses that we attenuate more, they are also the senses that are actually closer to the self, right? And we know this, for instance, like if I put my perfume, I habituate very quickly to my perfume, yeah? But if I go into a tube or something, people smell my perfume and they say, it's like, I don't like this. But I don't smell because it's mine, I attenuate this, yeah? And I think we're doing this all the time. And why we're doing this is because we process this in background, like transparently, right? We don't really pay attention, yeah? because we need to focus on the world, and our job is to engage with the world, not to, self-centered all the time. You can't really survive if you're self-obsessed. You do it because you can't survive alone. So this means that you need to engage with the world all the time. So you put the things outside in the background, the things that are there doing the job for you, in order for you to focus. But I would say that it's not because they're in the background, they're not important. So I have a paper with a brilliant student of mine, Tim, in London, and the title of the paper is Self-Control by Letting Go. And we want to show that actually what we call the control or the agency is not just the ability to control actively whatever is happening in the world, is the ability to correctly know what to disregard and what to control. And that balance will give you an accurate sense of agency and control. Yeah. And the shift on the focus is like it brings into the spotlight the neglected, humble, poor relative senses, like the smell and touch that we kind of neglect and put in the background. And I think that's super important.
Yeah, even other things like proprioception, all these other things we just completely neglect. We forget about it. It's as if it never exists. We forget once that gets knocked out, you're completely out. I mean, you can lose your vision and function. And we're so obsessed with vision as a set.
And, interestingly enough, people with depersonalization, they have high disruptions of vestibular system about the balance, the movement, the body in the world, right?
Yeah, so you see, that's actually quite fascinating. Clearly a link.
Yeah.
But Anna, one of my favorite papers that you wrote was the no-body problem. Really enjoyed that one. And I mean, provocatively obviously asks if a body is needed for intelligence or selfhood, and contrasts biological system, finite, death-bound constraints with AI's apparent eternity, which I found quite interesting. How does this no-body problem or this no-body angle challenge our assumptions about what makes a system truly smart? And why is death such a key driver for qualitative information processing in living beings?
Yeah, so that's, thank you. That's an interesting and an important question, and a tricky one. So I still need to think about it carefully, how I want to spell it out, but by in a rigorous manner. But what I want to say is that the end, because there is an end, there is an end. It's like, I want to say like Rumi, in the... I want to reply with a poem. What I want to say is like, because there is an end, like an end point, there's an end like a meaning. So the very notion of meaning is created by the existence of the end that should be avoided. Without that, there is no meaning. So it's a radical point that I'm taking, saying, well, systems that don't have an end don't care. And they cannot process meaning in the way we process meaning because their ontology doesn't depend on that. So their ontology depends on artifacts. It's like how many plugs I have, how many chips, and how smart is my coder, to put me, to function in a certain way. But we as living system, we don't have that. We have a very different ontology. And our ontology is almost created as a resistance towards that end. And it is the very resistance, the very act of resistance that creates what we call a life and meaning. And the intelligent thing to do when you are a living system is to balance carefully your energetic resources to allow you to keep that goal for long as possible, and with, be careful with your resources, because, you receive a certain amount of resource. Actually, I'm sharing this with you, that I'm sharing with my students, and they all laugh when I'm telling them. It's like I said, well, my favorite philosopher is Taylor Swift, because she said, she said something that, stayed with me, a bit like my grandmother said. It's like, think of your energetic resources like a luxury item, not everyone can afford it, right? It's like, because it's limited, if you spend it, it's like at a certain point, you just like, face the wall and say, oops, and that will be the end, and you don't want that. So if you are intelligent system, you need to keep that in mind, that energetic pool limited. And instead of like trying to ignore it or push it away or scramble, to do something else, is, I think, the beauty of it. It's a bit like Dostoevskian approach that I'm taking here. The beauty of it is like to befriend it and to do the best way you can with the resources that you have, to do beautiful things with the time and energetic resources you have here and now in the present. And hopefully you're lucky enough in that some catastrophic stuff will happen to you, which is entirely up to you, because you can do all that and then, I don't know, somebody crashed into the street or there's a war and then, everybody is like in danger. So, but I think at our small level, I would say is that, sorry about that. At the small level is what we really need is to befriend the end, because that will give us more meaning. That's what I would encourage people to do.
I love the titles of your work, because even with the neuroimmune stuff, I think it was The Brain is Not Mental, and then the Nobody Problems, the best titles.
Yeah,
and I was fundamentally linked very well as well. Sorry, you were saying?
I was a journalist in previous life, so I like titles.
And I think it's great because, I mean, you emphasize anticipation and allostasis as ways finite systems save energy against impending homeostasis failure. And so you can sort of see how things like the Nobody Problem or The Brain is Not Mental paper link, because it sort of ties into those prenatal nested self-regulation systems, and it reveals things like the origins of mind, something inherently tied to bodily survival goals, which I think is pretty fascinating.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'm trying to build like a coherent worldview from this perspective, and I have this idea of a book. So I'm. Do you know the French philosopher René Descartes, which is, the mind-body problem and the mind-body distinction. And in French, if you know, the need to René becomes a female first name. So René Descartes. So like René the Bridget Jones, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Zellweger. René Zellweger.
So I imagine, I'm a philosopher, so I can do this. So there are some advantages of being a philosopher. So imagine a parallel universe to ours, where women are allowed to go to university and to go to school and do philosophy since the dawn of time, since the humanity, becomes humanity. And in this parallel world, we have a French philosopher called René Descartes with an E. And she's also obsessed with the mind-body problem, except that she's pregnant. Yeah. So I want to rethink the classical philosophical conundrums, but through the perspective of embodied person that actually carries another body in her body. So how philosophy would be different if we take that perspective as being like the fundamental starting point of all inquiries that we have. And I want to make it like funny, because now and then let's suppose like there is some collapse happening and one of the worlds can see into each other. So it's like one of them ends up in one of the other worlds, and then put the finger in some funny way on something that hopefully make us realize that we take some things for granted, and we shouldn't. Because some things are really important, and if we really want to understand who we are as humans, you cannot close the eyes and just like ignore half of the humanity. It's like you cannot do that. It's like you shut yourself in the legs. You just like it's just like you've become very narrow. And it's the same with different cultures. I mean, it's like you cannot take just like one single way of looking at things from one single culture as being like the, solution to whatever, the mind is or the body is. I think we do share with living systems like cats and fungi and trees one big problem that is actually thrown upon us. Here's another thing I like to tell to my students, and when I'm telling this, I can see the eyes like, oops, and tell them it's like, nobody asks you to sign a consent form to be alive here and now in this particular form, right? It's like nobody asks you permission. You just like show up.
Yeah.
It's like, and you have to kind of like, adapt to the flow and understand what is going on. Yeah. And I think this is something we share with other living systems. In a way, me personally, that makes me feel held, right? So it's like, I don't have this like special place from outside where I need to control everything and understand this. But on the contrary, I feel like, oh yeah, so this is like a big journey. We are all in this together somehow. We have some connecting. So it's like when we have a big problem. But that very idea of sharedness, I think that's super important. And we should keep that alive. The fact that we do share this with other living systems and we are not special in that side. So we don't have any special rights to, endanger everything just from our anthropocentric and very selfish perspective, because whether we like it or not, we're shutting ourselves in the legs, because whether we are aware or not of the fact that we are sharing, we do share the things with other system. And I think this is the insight that you can have from a female René Descartes perspective, because if you already have the experience of co-embodiment as fundamental fact of life, you're going to say, I actually can't really solve this by my own. I need to, negotiate and exchange and, be careful and not just like hoard. It's like me, I am myself, and forget about the others, because it's not working this way.
Have you thought about a name for the book yet, Anna? Or are you still just working on titles mentally?
I need to think. But I still need to think. I don't have a definite title yet, but I do have already the cover.
Okay, great. Well, either way, titles tend to change as publishers and people. So when people get together, people often don't end up with their title they often wanted to.
So,
but I think in your case, the way you've named your paper so far, you'd probably make a good title maker. You'd be a good title maker.
Yeah. I need to think, but the René Descartes, that's just my character. And, it fits well because I'm French too, so it's kind of like, hey, here's René. And the French women are troublemakers, like Simone de Beauvoir and everything. It's like, hey, it's like let's face the problem and see. But because we do actually have a problem.
I like when you mentioned the consent form for existence. It also reminds me of the flip side when we talk about creating artificial intelligence or trying to create AI, or that's AGI, general intelligence, or conscious beings. And we often forget about the fact that every time we have kids, we do exactly the same thing without really thinking about those philosophical consequences of creating a conscious entity. So we don't even sign a form to sort of declare the fact that we are good enough to manufacture a conscious being. Just the same way we don't sign a consent form to come into this life. So it's pretty strange, this universe that we live in.
Yeah. Well, but I know it sounds a bit like woo-woo, but sometimes, going back to my paper with Tim was like the self-control by letting go. I think that without mystery, there cannot be knowledge. So it's like, we like knowledge, we like to find out things, and what we're doing here and now is like science and philosophy and knowledge and everything, but we are doing this because there is mystery and there's things to be found.
Yeah, if there is no problem, there is no solution. So this podcast doesn't exist without the fundamental problem that we're
so I think mysteries are good in that sense. It's like mystery are enable us to search for the light, and
Yeah,
Then
I fundamentally agree. I think what we know is a drop, and what we don't is the ocean. So, well, similar to what you were talking about the waves earlier, but there's so much to know. There's so many. We just keep putting that little bit of a ladder piece, trying to cross a bridge. That's just an eternal ocean of knowledge.
yeah.
Okay.
And this is why it's so important to focus on the present.
Exactly. I mean, we can't be chasing that knowledge all the time. At some point, you have to appreciate the knowledge you currently have and this experience.
So there is no absolute knowledge.
Yeah. There's no fun. Veridicality is something we all, even things like teleology, even when I started this podcast, because I initially started off while working in psychiatry, writing about psychiatry's defense for illusionism as a theory of consciousness, which is the fundamental view I had. Prior to that was emergentism, and prior to the very materialist views of consciousness. And then starting the podcast and doing the dissertation in itself changed over time. And I still, as I often say, people tend to hate the fact that I say this, but my views have changed over time. And
that's good.
Exactly. That's how I feel too. But at this point, I'm so agnostic about my views on consciousness because of how many different theories I've explored. And there's so many different convincing ones. I'm still not sold by many, but I'm very intrigued by so many. But I still remember how firm, like how much I believed when I wrote that dissertation. And it was because interacting with psychiatric patients, I could tell the same thing like where you spoke about depersonalization disorder and things like Cotard syndrome, where someone thinks they're fundamentally dead. Someone can't tell differences between time, etc. I remember writing about it more not to claim that consciousness doesn't exist, but rather that the way we talk about consciousness is the problem. And I think Keith Frankish does the same thing. It's more the intuition pumps of dissecting other theories of consciousness. And it's a very helpful tool to understand or break down other theories of consciousness. And that's what I think Dennett did as well. It was a great way to sort of to nitpick in the sense that you said earlier. It's that it's not this ethereal thing it's a process. It's perhaps something more, like you said, like an adverb or a verb continuously doing something rather than this one thing we're going to pinpoint one day with a neural correlate and just be like, okay, cool, that's it.
Yeah. No, I don't think that localization will work. And for the same reason I said about the self as well, I don't think that localization chauvinism, it will work. I don't think the self is inside the body. And I don't think the consciousness is inside the skull.
Exactly. And even when I read that paper back, a lot of times I can read it back and sort of almost convert that into a psychiatry's defense for panpsychism paper, because it's so easy to, because I'm not talking about the entity in itself, it's easy to apply both. And I use a lot of Carl Friston's work in it as well. And I know you guys collaborate as well and you use a lot of their ideas. But yeah, active inference was a big part of it. I need to reread that actually, and maybe perhaps post it out with some changes for people. But to get back to your work, which is far more fascinating, just by the way, you even collaborated, Mike Levin, who we spoke about earlier. You guys worked together on many different things, Basal cognition being one of them. I remember he also spoke about the fact that at some point, because of diverse intelligence and this field growing with so many unfamiliar substrates that show so many signs of cognition, how does viewing cognition as a multiscale web, not just neural, expand our exploration of reality, especially when bridging biological life to something like AI hybrids?
Yeah, so as you know, I'm a big fan of Mike Levin's work, and I think what he's doing is really, really important, really revolutionary, and he's like a brilliant mind. And each time we're having conversation, I'm like,
Yeah, you often leave thinking like, oh my God. I remember the first time I spoke to him, that's kind of when those illusionism tendencies starts.
I feel like I should wear of those, like as like my grandma said, wait a minute, let me think, it's like with Kirstein. Like, wait a minute.
There's always a mic drop moment with Mike.
Yeah,
mic drop moment. I like that actually. That's a pun.
Yeah. Wait a minute, let me think. So I have lots of those moments when I exchange with Mike. But so I get his idea. I think I agree with him when he says that we shouldn't treat human cognition as having something special. So as I said, we all share with all living systems like a big problem. And so that's the shared problem that we have, which is like, we don't want to die. So that's settled. So we have a big problem, and different diverse intelligence solve that problem in a very different way. And I think he's right to call that intelligence, because as I said, it's like, if the biggest problem you have is that one and you solve that problem, then by any definition, it's kind of like you're a smart person, because your ontology already exists and depends on it. So you can't really play chess if you don't exist. So you need to sort out the ontology first and then play chess later, right? So I think I agree with that. What I less agree with him, and we already know this because we're exchanging emails with him on a recent paper that I wrote with Eric, where we introduced a new ontological approach. It's called Biological Idealism, where we basically bite the bullet and say, well, actually, experience is a fundamental way of existing. So it's not panpsychist, but it's like, well, that's, this the thing that...
The big one, yeah.
The big one. And if that's the case, then what I want to say is that because necessarily we enter the world and we understand the world through our own subjective human experience, whatever we found about the world outside as necessarily has this like implicit lens coming from our perspective. And we can agree that yes, there are diverse intelligence that function that way, but whether we like it or not, our way to approach it is still going to be our way to approach it. Yeah, so to understand it. So, and there is no way to extract ourselves in an abstract space or Platonic space. This is the main point of disagreement that I don't agree. I don't think there is no way to abstract ourselves and to, find some pure forms or like Platonic forms that somehow, you find them in many different forms of lives. I think with Eric, we bite the bullet and say, actually, mathematics is a way of living. It's like mathematics lives in us, lives in us, in our way of like, and whether we like it or not, we stay in the loop. We stay in the loop of that. So I think a better way to put this, because this is as I said, I don't have like a, let's say, like a full-fledged opinion on this. I'm still wrapping my mind around it.
Yeah, still working on the idea.
What I want to say is that, with my students, I'm putting a slide usually with, a cat and robot, and I ask them what is the main fundamental difference between these two systems, and they come up with lots of responses. But for me, the most important one is that we do robots, we don't do cats. So it's like we don't do felines or something. So what I want to say is that if human hadn't existed, robots wouldn't have existed. But if humans hadn't existed, I don't know, felines might have existed. I don't care. I mean, life doesn't need humans to exist. This is what I want to say, right? And doesn't need our mind to exist. And life finds different forms of continuing the existence from many, many other forms. And I agree with Mike that we need to go and expand continuum to just like say, well, it's not just about us and we don't have something special in our mind, blah, blah, blah. But it also means then we need to own our ontology as like, because whether we like it or not, we are in the middle of it. And we need to clarify where exactly you're coming from, what's your ontological status, what's this like. And in our case with Eric, we bite the bullet and say, well, this is what we state. It's as like our starting point. Because as I said, whether we like it or not, the entrance point of understanding this is necessarily through our subjective experiences. And even if you use like sophisticated tools like conceptual tools like abstractions or mathematical formulas to find, forms in the world, like fundamental forms, like symmetries in the world. Those are always in relation to our own understanding of them and our way of like measuring them, our way of like positioning ourselves in that. And I don't think we can extract ourselves from whatever ontology we have. Doesn't mean
I think it's good that you brought that up. Sorry, Anna, to just stop you there, but this might help you unpack that further. But because if I had to ask you, I might have assumed perhaps it would be like a biological pan-experientialism.
No.
But yes, but it makes sense from what you're saying that you cannot abstract from it. So it has to be a fundamental ontology of this is,
yeah.
Completely get what you mean.
So it's we just bite the bullet and say own the ontology, do it metaphysics.
So if I had to ask you right now, so what is your philosophical view on consciousness that you would say it's this? Would you bite the bullet and just say biological?
Yeah.
Idealism.
I want to say is this means that you cannot extract experiences from living systems. So it's like experiences are the way of existing of living systems. And then
if Wikipedia had to give a definition today of this new view, biological idealism, what would it be?
Wait, I need to go back to
Let's formalize this.
I need to go back to the paper. Actually, we need to do some formulas on that too, because we wrote just a theory paper. So bear with us. This is very much a draft, and we try to get. Actually, speaking of that, so we have a workshop coming at the Lawrence Institute in Leiden in February 23rd, 27th. It's called Hybrid Agencies Crossing Borders. Embodied intelligence in biological and artificial systems, and where we address exactly what you asked me so far. And what we did in the first step, I came up with 5 fundamental questions around this topic, and I asked this question to 10 experts in the field, and I ranged the field from architecture to philosophy to psychology to neuroscience, psychiatry. So very broad, but exactly the same 5 question to all of them. And then I'm going to edit this in one big transcript that question 1, 10 answer, question 2, 10 answer. And those transcripts will be shared with the participants during the workshop, and they'll be invited to take a stance to agree or disagree and why, and start a debate. And then the idea would be to bring back philosophy out of the ivory tower, like the genius, let me tell you how the world works, to the philosophy in the agora, like let's have it a dialogue and it's going to be food and wine. It's like going back to I'm French, it has to be some sort of like food and wine involved. So, and that's just like the abstract thinking.
I'm from Cape Town, so we're notoriously known for wine, so don't worry.
Yeah, I know. Very good point. But I'm from Burgundy, so I would say,
yeah,
we can have a debate. We can have a different podcast.
That's next podcast.
Yeah, that's the next podcast. Yeah. So, and in that workshop, Eric will present the paper, and I really look forward to see, what other people say, because we have a very nice lineup. We have Mike Levin, Carl Friston, Mark Solms, Peter Godfrey Smith, Andy Clark, Sean Gallagher, Takashi Kigami, Beatrice de Gelder, Deborah Gordon, and I'm pretty sure I forgot some. But in any case, and Eric Rietveld coming from the philosophy side. So very wide range of.
That is a very powerful lineup there, including yourself. I mean, that is quite a group.
Thank you. Yeah, and then probably they would. I expect they would push me a lot. Say, hey, if I want to put this in Wikipedia, what exactly do you mean?
I'll be so curious to hear what they have to say about that. Actually, it would be many of them have been on the channel. I'm looking forward to, as you start exploring this, to see what they actually say about it. It's quite fascinating. I mean, I've never heard that before, and to me, it's got an intriguing thought. I'll try and do as much research on this as much as I can.
Actually, we start the paper with what we call the unplugging paradox. which is, again, as I said, I'm a philosopher. I like thought experiments. So imagine that you have in the future one plug, energetic. And in that plug, you have two system plugs. And one is an AI system that says things like, I don't want to die, I'm scared. Yeah. And the second system is a preterm infant incubator. Let's say 38 weeks old, right? And then you receive an email from your boss saying that unfortunately there is not enough resources for the two systems to be in the same plug. And says you need to unplug the unconscious one. Which one are you going to unplug? Yeah. So that's our starting point. So which system counts as conscious and unconscious and why, and how you do solve that problem. And it's like how you, and obviously, if you define consciousness as the ability to verbally express fear and emotion, then, well, you unplug the infant and the AI system, but if you define consciousness differently. So we invite basically people to think about the distinction between AI and biological systems are being dependent upon resources because they are, yeah, and how you manage those resources in function of whatever, intelligence is in relation to the embodiment. And then you make a decision and why. And we even propose some radical terms, which is, you probably like this one, but I'll let you go and read the papers we call ontological gaslighting.
So, repeat that, I missed that, say it again.
Ontological gaslighting.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to read that.
Yeah. I say,
I'm just making a note.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'll definitely check that out. Sorry, continue, Anna, you were saying?
I think that's the starting point of our paper, and then we unfold basically the metaphysical view, and we basically try to argue against the physicalist assumptions and say, well, in computational functionalism and all the assumptions that you have, and by the bullet say, well, all these views they have, this metaphysical view, take it for granted, but is it the only game in town?
I love that you've given it a name. I mean, I often find that once there's a name to it, it always has that little bit of a chutzpah or oomph that was missing.
Yeah.
Like it's not official until it's got a name. I remember when I spoke to Patricia Churchland, and they were trying to think about when they were trying to figure out eliminative materialism and what they should call it, and that's not actually what they wanted to call it. They wanted to call it revisionary materialism, because we constantly revise the concepts that when we think about consciousness. But eliminative materialism or eliminativism just sounded better, It's just one of those.
Yes.
It just has more of an impact.
Yeah. So we bite the bullet with idealism and say whether we like it or not, we are not gods. This is what we want to say. We cannot extract from the world.
I love it. I think it's a beautiful concept. I mean, even in No Body Problem, you distinguish between cumulative quantitative processing in AI from the qualitative discerning approach in biology. And there's always this key element here of exactly what you're talking about. This eternal mindset of an AI versus this biological ticking clock that...
But this is what, if I may, this is where the ontological gaslighting comes in, because these are not eternal minds.
Yeah.
They're not real. It's like...
Yeah, switch it off.
It's like they need resources. There has to be a plug. So, and it's like, not really. And it's like, there's some, hidden ontology behind it. And this is why we put the thing on the table. It's like, what is your metaphysic? What is your metaphysical assumptions? It's like, put it there on the table. I want to see them. Yeah.
I mean, it's very easy for us to just switch it off too. So it's
yeah, it's true.
We
shouldn't do it too successful, because it might die very quickly. It's like, if you take ontology for granted, just like die very quickly, right? You should, on the contrary, I think as the reason why we recall so vividly negative events is because we don't want to die, and the brain says it's like, don't do that again. It's like that's dangerous. And we retain negative events because we want to prevent them to go through them in the future. Whereas the positive one is like, oh, that was nice, that's fine. Yeah. But the negative, the trauma stays with us. And so because sometimes you say, why do I remember the negative things, the bad things, but never I remember the good things? But actually there is a reason behind that. And the reason is because you don't want to die. You want to keep track of that bad thing because you don't want to reproduce it in the future. And that's a very useful survival mechanism. Yeah. And that's a good thing to have in mind. And hence the ontology is important. Yeah. It's like, even if you take for granted, it's like, you better have your ontology correct, because if you think that Earth is flat and, we want to go on until, we're probably going to die very quickly. I
know. I love it when some of my colleagues at work, because as doctors, they're not really thinking about these ontological things all the time. I mean, it's very practical, very in the moment. And they often laugh at me just for even hosting a podcast like this. But they don't understand how important it actually is. Like this is, it's one of those basic building blocks of the way you perceive reality. Yeah.
And actually, sometimes this type of things actually hit you when it's too late. I mean, it works well when everything is smooth.
Yeah.
But again, with a crack, it's like when there's a crack, then that is going to be make or break things. Then, nature will decide who is going to keep surviving and who is going to not survive.
And we often see that when someone's on their deathbed and suddenly they're struck with all these ontological big questions. Those are the things they really want to know now. What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose? Is there a teleological nature to this universe?
Yeah.
And it's fascinating having conversations with those people. Well, Anna, this conversation went into so many places. It's been such an amazing. Your work keeps sparking such a deep sense of wonder, and from cellular fact checkers to nobody challenges for AI eternity, and now biological idealism. There's just so much, but these ideas obviously all push us towards integrating anomalous phenomena, human experiences from birth to death, to life in between, and human AI interactions as well. In this quest for understanding the mind-body solution, what excites you most right now?
I think what excites me most right now is the realization that hopefully is growing among, researchers, that we cannot approach this mystery on our own. And that we need to really, really open the doors to other ways of looking at things, open the door to new disciplines, and learn from others, and reach out in a highly collaborative. Basically, we need to mimic life. We need to mimic nature, and that is really, really about sharedness and communication and exchanging. And hence, I know it sounds a bit like romantic and idealistic, but I do believe in collaboration and dialogue and between disciplines. I think if you can go very fast if you are one track, but if it's like you're missing the landscape. So speed is not necessarily the best, not necessarily always the best solution. So I would say we probably also, with the world we live in at the moment, we need to have like a wake up call. And at Wittgenstein I said, wait a minute, let me think. It's like, this is going too fast, and it's like, where exactly this is going, and go back again more on this, like almost like Renaissance type of thinking, where people were doing science and doing art in the same time, but also they were doing literature, and there was like, I don't know, they were biologists and they were understanding how the earth was going and how mechanical things are working, and that was absolutely fine. There was no hierarchy in the the low and high level and noble, less noble disciplines in approaching the things. And I think that's something that should we should wait a bit
Yeah.
Stop a bit and think about it, because this frantic, forward thing, in French you call la fuite en avant, which means like you're running away from something towards something, but it's not really a solution. It's more like a running away from something towards something that you don't know where exactly you're doing. And usually that's not a good idea, because, if you're a successful adaptive system, you need to know, what to avoid and where you go. You need a goal, you need an end, because there is an end, you need an end.
Yeah.
So that's what excites me the most, is like this realization that we cannot advance in this mystery alone.
And I think it's the fact that you chose biological idealism it sort of fits and makes sense in the way you think about everything as a whole, because usually idealist philosophies in general have that sort of sharedness, that cumulative quality to it. It's that sort of togetherness, or that even love. Like even people talk about things, they don't want to use certain words, the L word in science, or people they love to avoid it. But you don't want to romanticize it as well, because then it doesn't sound as philosophical or scientific. So there's that fear. But the truth is, most of those types of theories have that quality in it, and it's almost inescapable.
Yes. But I think this idea of, collaboration, dialogue, and exchanges, I think that's something that can be quantified, that can be, channeled, that can be, you can pour resources into it. That open-mindedness that should be there.
Yeah.
And I think
passionate curiosity.
Sorry.
So that sort of passionate curiosity with reasonable skepticism, still trying, like almost a goal-directed collaborative approach to construct rather than destruct.
Yes. And this is why, as I said, for this workshop, we choose this one theme, but with different disciplines, and I want them to engage with each other.
Yeah, and I love that approach as well, because it's a great way to sort of highlight the philosophical thinking within all these thinkers who are always thinking about something, but never perhaps tailored the questions in a way that make it philosophical. So yes. I actually love that.
Yeah, I want to implement exactly this, and to teach them to show them the virtues of.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, let me think.
That's gonna be actually, that sounds really epic. I would love to watch that at some point. If you have any links to this or anything we can put on, please let me know.
Yeah,
I'll definitely put that. But Anna, before we leave, I want to make sure that you don't leave anything unsaid. Let's say, for example, merely saying something like biological idealism, I don't want anyone to mistake your view and then suddenly put you in this box that you're not really trying to put yourself into. So maybe perhaps a last opportunity to say, what is it not? Like, what would, if someone had to think what biological idealism means just by reading a title, what would you immediately want to say? Actually, wait, this is not what that is.
It's not panpsychism.
Yeah.
That's easy. It's not that. So, and the reason why I'm saying this is because physicalism and panpsychism, they basically share the same problem, which is the very distinction between mental and physical. Something that we just like don't adore. So just like, I don't know what that is, actually. The only thing, I can see what the body is, I can measure it and, touch it. I don't really know what the mind is. It's like, I don't have a good explanation what the mind is and what's the mind. So unless you take the Soma-Sema theory, you understand where that comes from, because you actually want something that actually is not really going away with the body, because the body is bad. The body makes you suffer. The body makes you die, and you don't want to die. So it's like, let's have a mind, which is fine. I understand this is a coping mechanism for me, in my humble opinion. But what I want to say, if you get rid of that, make an effort and just like, let that lens apart, and suppose you're in this parallel universe with a pregnant René Descartes, and you have a completely different, lens, and you see, well, what is really happening here, right? It's like, here is the cell, and there's this bunch of cells, and this is related to this environment, and they have to solve this problem, and then they have this like space to solve the problem. And then, as Mike said, it's like they at the beginning there's this limited space for the problem solving, but it becomes bigger because it intervenes with others. Then it was like a bigger problem, and then you need you have like different problem at different scales, right? But all towards the same goal, which is like stay away from the end, which, by the way, you don't choose. It's not something that you choose. It's just like, don't want to die. And and I think that's the starting point that I would like to take. It's not that adult-centric already. You have the full-fledged individual. Let me think what is happening right now. Oh, I can have these experiences, and in the body I can distinguish the two. Hence, there are two different things. If you take a developmental biological perspective and see how things really unfold in the life before you actually have a brain, then you have different problems, but not that one. And the problems we have is, how do you get from self-organization in a certain level to different type of self-organization, and different level that has these different qualities that you don't have at that level. I think that's a big problem. And another big problem would be, how do you get from self-organization of physical systems such as, I don't know, a snowflake, to self-organization biological systems? And I think the key question here, the key answer was already like approached and beautifully described by people like from the enactivist perspective, like embodied cognition, people like Maturana and Varela, that they like the autopoiesis, like the vulnerability of the system, because they're open and they depend upon nothing to exist. That's what makes fundamentally different than the snowflake. Yeah. So there is something beautiful in life about the openness and vulnerability, and which ties again with my Dostoevskian idea of like there is an end, and the meaning is intrinsically related to that end, and this is why we care.
Well, I think your work's absolutely incredible, Anna. Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. I have so many questions, but obviously we can save it for round two, and the next time, once you build on it, I think we'll have an even better conversation. But this has been really incredible. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Tevin. Thank you.
Any final words, Anna? Anything you feel you've said you haven't said that you'd like to just reiterate, or any last words from your side?
I think we need to, my final words would be, stay critical. Stay critical, stay away from dogmas. And it's beautiful to ask questions. It's beautiful to find answers, but when you ask a question, you have already half of the answer in it. So don't disregard the importance of the questions and hands off philosophy. I want to defend philosophy. I think it's super important to stay critical, to have critical reasoning, and to know why I'm doing this. It's like the why question. Yeah, it's like it's super important, and to have that. Take some time to do the Wittgensteinian thing before you rush to collect the new state of data that that lab already has, and it's like, and just wait a minute, let me think. What exactly does it says to me to this about us as humanity, about the world, about how they perceive the world, and about other creatures? I think that's important, especially right now, because we have like I think we are more like in sort of like bulimia of hoarding of information, and I'm French, and I like to use this metaphor. It's like, well, eating fast and a lot is not necessarily eating better, It's like, take it easy, and quality over quantity, because this is what life is about, well, qualitative information processing, not about the quantity. Doesn't matter.
I think that's an absolutely beautiful way to end, Anna. Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. As I said, I'm a big fan of your channel.